Works to some extent. So kingdom fungi is a fairly cohesive bunch that is separate from plants and separate from animals and separate from bacteria, the kingdom Monera, which we're going to look at shortly. But the kingdom Protista, that's kind of a made-up box, to be perfectly honest with you. It's just leftovers. If stuff doesn't fit, if organisms don't fit in the one of four other kingdoms, then they just got shoved into Protista, right? So it's a kind of a mixed bag of, it's a motley crew of different kinds of organisms. They're all eukaryotic, but that's kind of not, you can't say much else about what they have in common. So we'll get to them. What can you say about the kingdom fungi? So, and I look, fungi, you'll hear all kinds of different, and there's lots of arguments amongst microbiologists. I'm just going with fungi, whatever suits you. So if it annoys you, I'm sorry. These are the key characteristics. You know something belongs to this kingdom because they reproduce by means of spores. Now, spores, ferns produce spores, they're plants. Bacteria, as we'll see, produce endospores. That's not the kind of spores we're talking about. These are fungal spores. So if you produce fungal spores, then you're a fungus. Right. But it's fine to say spores. If you're asked in the exam, one of the characteristics of fungi is they reproduce by means of spores. And even then, there's different kinds of spores, as we'll see. We'll come across the zygospore shortly. They are all eukaryotic. Again, that's not saying much, seeing as all the other kingdoms, bar the bacteria, are all populated by eukaryotes as well. Remember, eukaryotic organisms are those whose cells contain a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. Organelles within the nucleus, cell organelles that are bound within a membrane, right? So like the nucleus is, but also mitochondria, chloroplasts, those kind of things are characteristics of only eukaryotic organisms. When it comes to the mode of nutrition, and I'm going to kind of gloss over this now because we're going to look at it in a bit of detail with the bacteria, who really, there is no mode of nutrition that some bacteria somewhere is not involved with. But when it comes to fungi, they're pretty much either saprophytic, which means that they rely on getting their nutrition from dead and decaying organic material. Now, dead organic material, decaying organic material, they're actually causing the decay. These are saprophytes, or there's another word for the decomposers, right? So saying something is saprophytic, what we're really talking about is that we'll see in a minute how what the sort of digestive approach is. It's not pretty. But what they do is they grow on dead organic material, not living organic material. If they're gaining their nutrition from living organic material, by and large, we're talking about parasites. Now, the key thing about a parasite is it's gaining nutrition, so it's getting nutritional benefit from a living organism that it's causing harm to. Now, that's a key piece to that, right? It's not a parasite unless it's causing harm. So it must gain benefit and cause harm to the organism that it's in this, close relationship with, feeding relationship. If it's not causing harm, we'll see there's another word that you use. It's called a commensal relationship. And if they're both benefiting from this relationship, and there are some fungi that do this, we call those mutualistic organisms. Okay, so we'll look at that a little bit later, and we'll talk about symbiotic and all that kind of stuff later. They are not autotrophic. These fungi are not autotrophic, which is why they don't belong in the plant kingdom, because they don't have chlorophyll, they can't photosynthesize, they can't make their own food. So generally speaking, they're saprophytes or parasites. They have a cell wall, the cells, although calling them cells is a bit of a stretch in the case of these multicellular fungi like rhizobus, which we'll look at, which you might have been looking at already. But they do have a cell wall. So that cell wall is different to the cell wall in plants. It's made of a polysaccharide carbohydrate, a complex carbohydrate that's not cellulose. It's called chitin, all right? So chitin is a polysaccharide, it's a carbohydrate that is what the cell walls of fungi are made of. And they do this thing called extracellular digestion of substrate. And that's what I'm saying. This does not sound like a fun way to have your dinner. But what they do is, so if you think about what we do is we take food, we put it inside ourselves, it goes into a special series of organs that comprise the digestive system. As it goes through, We, break down food through physical and chemical digestion. That's our story. What they do is they produce enzymes. Fungi produce enzymes, digestive enzymes, that as they grow on their substrate, so as they grow on, as they're growing on the surface of whatever it is they're growing on, right? They chuck out these digestive enzymes onto the surface of it, onto this, whatever it is, wood or, apples or whatever it is there, and these enzymes digest the food outside their body. So imagine a fungus growing on something, it's producing the enzymes, chucking the enzymes out onto the food. The food gets digested, and then they slurp up the digested food through absorb it through their cell membrane, right? So it's kind of, disgusting, basically, the life of fungus, I have to say. But they're really interesting. So what they do is as they're growing, they're producing these threads. And these threads, this is what we generally call mold, this kind of horrible, hairy stuff that bacteria produce. We call that hyphae. So we talk about the collection of hyphae, like a hyphal mat, right? Is this collective term is called mycelium. So mycelium is a word that we use to describe a big bunch of hyphae. It's called a mycelium. So get those words out of the way. This year, there was a bit of a curveball in the exam, and a lot of people weren't happy about this. That they hadn't been teaching this to their students. That they needed to know that the exam asked them to know the name of one harmful mushroom, right? A toxic or a poisonous mushroom, and that, I think, was a bit of that it hadn't been something that a lot of people knew about. So. Question here, just how don't enzymes harm them at all? Yeah, so that's a good question. So they have adaptations. So their cell wall, their cell membrane is adapted so that it doesn't absorb and doesn't get affected by the enzymes that they're secreting. So, the usual story with enzymes is they're highly specific. So they will digest one kind of substrate only. So they just modify their cell surface so that they don't get affected by this. Really good question. Okay, so what are we talking about when we're talking about these? So there's some nice mushrooms out there and some not so nice mushrooms. If you don't know your mushrooms, they're obviously, I'm sure you've heard this, really not a good idea to go picking mushrooms that just because they look nice and in eating them. That's just a recipe for disaster. And you'll see why in a second. The ones that, mushroom hunters are out there, and if you know what you're doing, it can be really lucrative. Like I know people who are out there collecting because they know where to look. They're collecting these. Excuse me. They're collecting. Let me just put my tones off. They're collecting highly prized gourmet mushrooms that they're able to keep themselves because they like them and they're delicious. Or some I know somebody who lives up in Donegal, makes a good bit of money selling mushrooms because he knows where to look for them. So we're looking at things like, I'll show you pictures in a second. Boletes are highly prized. Italians call them porcini, if you're into cooking. Truffles are the other ones that Italians and French people are really into. If you know, truffles are super expensive. I think they're worth more gram per gram than gold, believe it or not. So a truffle would be the size of a small golf ball, could be hundreds of euro. So and they're not that heavy, right? So it's small mushroom, kind of, light. So super expensive, highly prized. These are the mushrooms that people are after. But you need to know what you're doing, right? So there are two famous mushrooms. Well, they're well known, and they have these fantastic names: the death cap and the destroying angel. So kind of, the name kind of says it all, really, doesn't it? But the thing is, if you look, and the thing is, if you eat even a quarter of one of these mushrooms without treatment, you could be dead from liver failure in like 24 hours, 48 hours. So you're well warned, right? The one on the left there doesn't look that different from kind of, mushrooms you might buy in Tesco. But you see there's a collar on it there. That kind of collar is a bit of a giveaway in there, the top of underneath the gills. So that's one of the poisonous ones, that the death cap. The one on the right is a bolete. They grow really, they're rare, I wouldn't say common in Ireland, but you find them. This one in particular is kind of bolete. It's the penny bun. It's the bleatus edge, it's the one that people really want. This is the cep or the porcini that mushroom hunters are really looking for. One of them they're really looking for. And it really looks like it's like something in Lord of the Rings, right? It looks like a brilliant, and they are really nice. They are, if you're into mushrooms, they're really delicious. So you find them every now and again. There's variations on them that aren't quite as nice as those ones. But anyway, they're penny bun and the death cap. So you should know a couple of names. Everyone knows this one on the bottom left. That's kind of poisonous. It's not going to kill you stone dead, but it's not going to be fun. You eat that, you're going to get, it's going to be kind of nausea and, we maybe throwing up or whatever. But you're also going to get fairly nasty hallucinations and things. Not fun hallucinations, right? This is not something that you would wish upon yourself or anyone else. And the ones on the right there they're chestnut mushrooms you can buy in Tesco.